Welcome to the Restoring Our City podcast. My name is Jobbin. I'm excited to be back with another episode with my fellow co-host, Jeswin Thomas. And Jeswin, as you know, we have these conversations and they're very candid. And we have to talk about today's topics that help connect our community. And a good way to do that is with our community itself. And love to introduce Priya Johnson to the Restoring Our City podcast. Priya, how are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We're good. We're good. We're really excited because you have started a really great organization, the Brown Table Talks. And it's funny, we actually met around a table. It was probably a brown table, wasn't it, Justin? At your house?
Correct.
We have a brown table, and we met.
You have a brown table,
and we had this conversation. Not just this very conversation, but we had our introductory meeting with Priya was around the table, and just hearing your heart for community just made so much sense to have you on as our first guest of the year to talk through community. But Priya, how are you? How's things going? I know you're in Chicago, right? And St. Patty's weekend, and you're alive, so that's good. How's things going?
I very intentionally stayed indoors just so I could stay alive for this podcast. You're welcome, Chicago.
Yes.
But it is good. Chicago is good. It is cold and snowy. We lost the St. Patty's pristine weather. But I'm just excited to be on. So thank you guys for having me as the first guest of the year. It's exciting.
Absolutely.
This is what you signed up for when you moved up to Chicago, all right? I know you're coming from Denver and Texas, but we fluctuate here in the month of March and April. So we'll see how many more snowstorms and 70-degree weathers we get before it becomes consistent.
I literally have whiplash. Like, this weather is insane. Just give me Texas heat where I know it's stable, or give me Colorado snow. We're good. But
there you go.
I don't know. Chicago, you're on another level. Sorry.
It builds character. That's what I say.
Right.
But Priya, for those of our listeners who may not know you, we'd love to kind of just dive into the background, where you're from, and then how you really got started with your ministry. But just tell us a little bit of your background, and mentioned a couple states already. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Priya. I was born in Denver, Colorado, and moved to Austin, Texas when I was like 7 years old. I grew up in the South Asian Malayali church, and I eventually went on to go to a multi-ethnic church, and that's where I met the Lord and gave my life to Christ, and later on was called into missions and ministry. Yeah, and so I've lived in Texas for quite a while, and then back in 2023, I moved to Chicago for grad school, and I had the pleasure of meeting Jeswin and Stephanie. They are awesome, and then just connecting with different leaders here in Chicago. And so that is how I got here, basically. The Brown Table came very unexpected and came only last year as just a thing that the Lord put into my heart. And we'll expand on that more of that later.
I was going to say, Priya, as you were kind of going through the different states, I noticed you left out some international experiences that you had as well. So you want to touch on any of the foreign travel that you had before you ended up here in Chicago?
Okay. Fair enough. So yeah, I was called into ministry missions when I was 17 and went away to college, did college ministry. And then after college, I just started pursuing ministry more and more, worked at local churches, did a lot of like multi-ethnic ministry. And then eventually the Lord called me to do some work in East Africa. And so I lived in Kenya and Tanzania for a total of 6 months doing organizational ministry over there, as well as a little bit of medical missions.
Very cool. That's a well-rounded experience. And so from a global kind of focus to now South Asians, and it seems like there's this focus on South Asians and the Christians in our community and people that we probably grew up with. What really led you to kind of focus on this population and really reach out to kind of our local community?
Yeah. To be honest, it was a very, very unexpected thing, but has been so rewarding. So most of my ministry has always been in the multi-ethnic sphere. And I had socially remained in the South Asian Malayali circles. And I had been around and I knew people but I wasn't ever in the South Asian ministry world. And then back in 2023, when I moved here to Chicago, I had this like yearning to be around South Asians. And that had never been something that I experienced in my life. I was always very content in multi-ethnic spaces. So I started just like exploring that more and seeing what more of that was, as well as just being around people who were serving the Asian like group in diaspora itself. And then from there, I was just praying about it more and more. And in the spring of 2024, I had a month and a half long of dreams of brown tables. And me and vivid dreams have a long history. So I knew that this was something that like I needed to not take lightly and really pray about. And so I spent months praying about it, and finally God gave me a word that it was supposed to be a ministry. I didn't really know what the ministry was. And so more and more, I just prayed and explored it and then had conversations with different leaders. And it's unpacked to be what it is now.
That's awesome. I was gonna say, Priya, as you're kind of going through your story, I think that's an experience a lot of us relate with, right? You born and brought up in an ethnic church, you end up in a multi-ethnic space, but some of us tend to almost run away from our past or separate ourselves from community in general. You seem like you're kind of running back toward it with the series of dreams. Have you found that challenging to sort of maybe focus your attention back to a South Asian space that you came from? Do you find that more rewarding? Kind of what's your experience has been since that time?
I think it's maybe been a mix of both. So I had left the Indian church pretty young. I left the Indian church when I was, I think, 13.
Hmm.
And it was my decision on my own. My parents still go to the Indian church. Um, and so I think in that time, I've had the opportunity to have a lot of healing from it. And so coming back into the South Asian world, I'm able to approach it from a healed perspective, but also with the perspective of seeing how other cultures and denominations do things, which has been really cool. I think the hard part has been adjusting to the cultural norms and more of the nuances of our culture and what ministry looks like in our culture. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting too. So who drove you when you're 13 years old to your other church?
Yeah.
How did you leave?
Um, it was really just like this conviction that I needed to have a deeper faith. I had experienced some incredible relationships and community with Chachis and Chachens within like the region of Texas, and at regional retreats, I connected with them so great, but I didn't necessarily feel that on my day to day, and life was hard. And so once I started seeing that like my uncle and his kids had that experience with their church, I was just drawn to it. And so I talked to my uncle, and it was a lengthy process. My mom would drop me off in the morning at 6 a.m., and I would be at church all day with my uncle and aunt. And then at the very end of the day, they would drop me off. Yeah, it was thankfully like my uncle, and having my uncle and my aunt go to that church was a big blessing.
Yeah, I was gonna say it shows the need for community, right? Like it opens up our horizons even at a young age if we get convicted about something. Um, so now, kind of in the South Asian kind of sphere, what are some of the things that are shaping you, like where you're noticing, hey, this is standing out to me about the South Asian culture that we need and we probably don't get as you've experienced other cultures and maybe where they thrive. What stood out to you about our people?
What stood out to me in specific was the fact that we automatically connect with people of our same ethnicity. And there's like this automatic like safety and connection. And then the other thing that stood out to me was I think the fact that biases and there's still a lot of like shame within the community that ends up hurting people. So coming back to the South Asian like world, I truly didn't know what people needed or what the South Asian church needed. So I honestly just started by asking a lot of questions, and I asked a lot of leaders questions. And what a lot of people said was the need for community and the need for authenticity in the vulnerable conversations. And so that kind of like where, even though I had seen it, having that reaffirmed by South Asian leaders really rooted to the force that like this is something that I could help. And this is something that like my story and who I am has has been made for this purpose.
Mm. That's good. I was gonna say, you kind of started off with saying one of the things you notice about South Asians is the fact that we can all connect and have that shared experience really quickly. I know Joby and I always joke about this. We should start a podcast where you throw two random Indians together in a room and see how long it takes for them to find a connection. But on the second side of that, almost like coin, you said, that lacking of authenticity, with a lot of the shame, the stigmas that you've been noticing, and one of your sort of diagnoses here is the fact that a lot of South Asians and Indian Christians struggle with surface level relationships. Why do you think that is? On one side, we're so good about hanging out together. On the other side, we're not good about being vulnerable. What's the diagnosis here for Priya? Why do you think that this is a problem?
Um, and to provide some context, I'm in the medical world, so that's why Jeswin's diagnosed.
Clinical diagnosis, please.
So my clinical diagnosis is looking at what happens in most like South Asian relationships, and I'm going to go on a very broad sense here, where we are not having vulnerable conversations because there is a lack of um authenticity, in the sense of like we're afraid to be real due to the pride shame culture that has been so ingrained in our society, and the fear that like we're going to be judged by other people. And that's impacted like the way that we are building our communities too, because as much as we can connect with any South Asian, if you look relatively remotely brown, you can easily just have a conversation with someone. um, and while we can do that, we're not having those deep connections and those deep conversations that last and that are like life-giving and bringing people closer to Christ.
Mm.
We're really good at the surface level, but not those deep ones. And so I really think it just comes down to like vulnerability, and then like the fear of judgment and the fear of like not meeting the status quo.
What do you think are some of those barriers that you just talked about with vulnerability? I know you brought up, that honor shame paradigm that a lot of Eastern cultures deal with, but is there anything else that you'd say stands out in terms of other barriers that potentially stop that vulnerability from coming out?
I think because it's been like just a social norm to be very surface level. Definitely honor shame, fear of judgment. I think the historical expectation of our parents brought us here to do this, this, and this. Stepping outside of the status quo is really hard. And then I think like even just in voicing opinions, it's a lot harder to do that, being our culture.
Yeah. I was going to say, it's almost like a double-edged sword, right? With our South Asian culture, we're really good at knowing everybody, and we're 2 degrees of separation from each other. And that's a great networking tool. But because of that, it's really hard to open up, because the moment we're in fault of something, guess what? Everybody and their mother knows about it too. And I think that's the double-edged sword about our people. Like the moment you slip up and you make a mistake, everybody knows. So I'm never going to share it, because everybody knows each other. And I think that's so sad, and it's hard to overcome, right? Because then we might be stripping away our identity of who we are.
Yeah.
But I think when we talk about vulnerability, maybe shifting it back to you, Priya, how have you, not to say that you have to open up all your personal secrets on a podcast, but like, how have you seen the personal impact instead of more generalized? How have you seen the power of vulnerability at work in people that you know, or maybe personally, and the strength of that?
Oh my gosh, there's so many things going through my head about that question.
Yeah.
I think vulnerability is something that not only deepens relationships, but it is also deepening our connection to the Christ and what God had intended for our relationship with Christ. Um, and so being vulnerable with each other means that we have to create a safe space in spaces. And so, like you said, Joby, like we have to have that space where we know that they're not going to go tell our parents and they're not going to go tell the entire church or make us stand up and confess our sins. Um, and that is something that you have to intentionally do and very explicitly like make as a statement in a lot of South Asian friend groups where I've made those statements of what you say here is not going to go anywhere else. And you have a safe space here, and I'm here to just help you and where you are right now. In terms of how I've seen that change in my life, honestly, was changed through that vulnerability. I think one of the very first connections that I had that made me realize that there was a deeper faith was a retreat where HAG opened that and was able to be vulnerable with me and opened that space for me to be vulnerable back. And it sparked like so much healing down the road, but then also this like newfound understanding that like there doesn't need to be shame in my relationship with Christ. And I am supposed to be vulnerable with Christ as well.
That's huge. I think that's so important for our listeners to hear. There's strength in vulnerability. And I was gonna say, like we shared a list of questions to Priya, just our conversation, like where we wanted to structure this. But you've come up with a million questions too, Priya, and this is the first edition I think that I got when I first met you. So I was thinking maybe we just jump off script a little bit. And I mean, I know we sent you a list of questions, but I think one way that you shared vulnerability is like you've put together all of these great questions for people to open up, right? And not that we're going to go through all of these, but you should get them wherever books are sold. So, um, but I think that's so important. Like we got to open up vulnerability, but like highlighting stories and where people have come from. And I think it'd be cool to kind of go through one of these, but
you puff a random one out and let's see what we get.
Should we just pop a random question?
I think we should.
All right, we're gonna go around.
Can I have the honors, guys?
Sure.
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay. So we'll do it in the sense that everyone has to answer this question.
Oh,
Okay.
snap. Technical difficulties.
Wow, coming up like a reverse interview. What just happened?
Oh, right.
That's what I like to do. I'm the question person. I couldn't let you guys have all the fun. Okay. Roundtable Talks Edition 1. What is a common misconception people have about you, and how does it differ from who you really are? So let me repeat it.
I'm going to marinate on it for a second, but you could repeat it one more time.
What is a common misconception people have about you, and how does it differ from who you really are?
Joby, you got a good answer for this, or do you want me to start it off?
I think I'll just kick it off and say, I'm sandwiched in the middle of an older brother and a younger brother, and I think my identity that really shaped a lot of things about my identity, where I didn't know if I could take the lead or I had to give instruction because I needed to listen to my older brother or give instruction to my younger brother, and so my identity as a leader was really in disarray, and I never felt confident in being a leader until, my early 20s. It was one of those things where things weren't getting done. I had to take charge, and people didn't look at me as a leader because I didn't have the musical talent as my brother or didn't have the ministry specific calling. My younger brother went to seminary. So I felt sandwiched in the middle with no identity. And so I thought many people looked at me as no talent person with no leadership capability at all until I almost had to prove myself. And I think the misconception from people was that I wasn't a leader, but I knew I had this initiative in me. I wouldn't say leadership ability, but I would say I've always had the initiative to take the charge, to be the first one to come up with a crazy idea and let's just throw it to the wall and see if it sticks. And I think that helped develop me into a leader, but early on, the misconceptions of not being a leader was there on my life until I had to break out of it. If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
That's good. I have a couple different thoughts that come to mind. I think one, just like a general worker societal sense. Every single time you see an Indian or a brown person, you're thinking, are they Hindu or Muslim, right? Like, what are you? And I'm like, I'm Christian. It's like, oh yeah. It's like, oh, you're an Indian Christian. You're the first one I've ever met. And you think about those stories and just kind of educating people, like, yeah, Christianity's been in India for like 2,000 years, bro. It's okay. Let me tell you about some stuff. And then that's always been there. The second layer, I would say, in terms of misconceptions, is it always feels weird whenever I meet another Indian Christian and be like, oh yeah, I'm Pentecostal, right? Like, or we're kind of the weird group in this middle of all these traditions. And, with other Penti people, it feels safe. Not Penti people, it's like, oh, what do you guys do? You guys speak in tongues? You guys do some crazy stuff? And we unpack some of that in our last few episodes. So I'll just leave that as is. But the third, I'll relate to you too, Jobbin, which was being an only child, right? Like that's probably throwing people for a curveball just within an Indian community too. But even being an only child, I know one of the things Stephanie said before we started dating was she never wanted to date an only child person because either they're probably weird, they're probably selfish, they're probably, someone that doesn't know how to relate to any of the siblings. You're right, Joby, like I probably checked off all those boxes. And then slowly over the course of dating, she's like, oh, you know what? These are all misconceptions I had about only children. And he's kind of breaking all of those. So I'll say I conquered one, but you know what? I don't know who gave only children a bad name. But I'm out here trying to find that person and just tell them, bro, you ruined it for all of us. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you did. But you ruined it for every only child on the face of this earth.
That's funny.
I mean, Felton, you do have some weird stuff about you, but
Yeah,
I don't think you fit the status quo for only children.
Thank you. Well, you got to answer this question too now.
I will. I think there's two that really stand out. I think one is I actually am not often thought of to be Indian. I get Hispanic quite often. And then there's a misconception that like anytime I'm around Indians that I am the whitewashed one, which maybe isn't a misconception in full, but in reality, like I do have quite a bit of culture in me. And so I just need to state that for the fact. And I think the other misconception that like really surprises people is I am an introvert. And so I can be very vocal and loud and possibly extroverted, but it's mainly in leadership settings and in settings that I've kind of trained myself to be. But if I don't have my own time, it's a no bueno.
So spice level on 1 to 5, like what? How do you take your chicken curry?
I could take the heat. I think like maybe probably a 4.
All right, so we're not whitewashed at all.
It's more like when I try to speak Malayalam. That's another story. Don't have me do that.
All right, well, we don't get it. I think that's all of second generation or broken Malayalam that we speak. But thanks for going through this exercise. I think it's eye-opening to like see the types of questions that you've put together to open people up, right? And so when you talk about like intentional spaces, I love how you talked about creating the space. It's really easy to talk about honor, shame, and these are the downfalls, but to get over that, you got to make the intentional spaces. So where have you seen that be successful and the impact that it's made? Like, how do you create a space for people?
I think the question is more of like, where have I seen it not be successful? And honestly, it's successful in every setting. Any setting that you are very intentional about making the space. I don't think that there's ever been a situation where I made this space and it didn't lead to a deeper relationship or a deeper conversation. For me, like I've always been a question person. And so doing these questions, no matter how off the wall they are, it always led to a deeper conversation. But in 2024, I realized that like having a deck of questions brought out a different level of vulnerability. And so having the physical deck helped me bring the conversations to so many more spaces than I would intentionally do on my own. So like I would have a deck in my car and I would take a deck to a coffee shop and do like a coffee shop hangout, or I would take it to a dinner hangout and we would just pull it open. And so I think that opened the doors to having a lot more depth to conversations and vulnerability that I hadn't had previously. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, it
It's like
completely makes sense.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. Do you have any like cool stories from any of these, breaking out your deck and having any of these, table talks, if you will? Any cool stories that you've seen come from it? I'd love to just hear more about that, and then maybe I could share some of my experiences with the deck as well.
Sure. So, Brown Table Talks, I've been able to it's gotten sold. It's awesome. It's all over the country. I got requests to send it to Canada, and I don't know how to get it to Canada. Canadians, I'm trying to get it to you, I promise.
Is there a text number?
It's really hard. Probably, honestly, the postal system is rough.
You didn't just say that. Oh my God. Do we have any smugglers? You're coming from Detroit, Michigan, cross over the bridge. Let's get those folks on the pod and smuggle things.
They deserve it too. But I've heard really great conversations between different generations, using the deck and being able to dive deeper into relationships. I think of when I first launched the Brown Table and voiced the idea to Jessa and Stephanie, they were headed on a trip, I think, to Canada actually. And I sent them a list of questions to ask their parents on the road trip to Canada, just because I was like, yo, dive deeper. Let's see where these conversations and these questions go. So I think the relationships and the depth of it have really blown my mind. I even just use them in multi-ethnic spaces as well. I don't think while I created the questions with brown people in mind, and on my heart, it's not necessarily just for brown people. And so it's been really cool to see that there's not only deep conversations happening to understand other people, but other cultures are understanding the brown culture a little bit more through this deck.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's so funny when Priya kind of told Steph and myself about that idea. She sent us a list of questions, and we take this trip to Canada. We come back probably a week later, and when we arrive, she comes over and she just has a card deck already made. So the speed at which Priya Johnson operates here, it is lightning fast. So I want to throw that out to all of our listeners. But the second one that really comes to mind is Steph and I kind of carry these decks in certain spaces. And so when we were down in Atlanta with all of her siblings, we're all kind of chilling, grilling up some Korean barbecue, and we're just all around the fire, and we just brought out the deck, and we just hey, Priya created this, we just want to try it out. And so we got through one round of questions that everyone just wanted to keep going. So we just got through, I forgot how many different questions, but yeah, you could literally break this thing out anywhere, whether it's around a fire, whether it's cooking up some K barbecue, coffee shop, wherever else. So just having a small deck that you could carry wherever helps you create that space.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, you touched on something, Priya, really interesting about this word community, and even cross-culturally, this could have an impact across cultures, no matter where you're from. So it's not specifically for the brown community. For anybody who's listening to, I know we have listeners across cultures too. So, but I think there's something unique that you said at the very beginning. You talked about how there is this safety and comfortability when brown people come together. And I know the Church of Jesus Christ is diverse and it's multi-ethnic and there's a strength to it. But how do you, and I'm trying to figure out how to word this too, because how do we tap into the uniqueness of our culture, right? Without being exclusive to other cultures? How do we find places to thrive in a mono-ethnic place where we're still called to be cross-culturally impactful? You know what I mean? How do we do that to our brown communities without feeling like, oh man, I'm really focused on one particular type of people?
Yeah. Oh, this is a conversation I bring up a lot, actually. I think that it's really healthy to have Christian community that's outside of one ethnicity. And that's might be a hot take, and that might be something that not a lot of people have. But I think I have learned exceedingly more from people who have had different experiences from me. And if we stay in the same bubble of South Asian Christians, the number of people that have different experiences from you are gonna it's gonna get like you're not gonna end up meeting people at some point. Um, because I think we bond and we find each other that have similar experiences than us. And that's a big part of why we feel so comfortable with each other. So in multi-ethnic spaces, when you have that unity in Christ and you are able to know that we are going to be brothers and sisters in Christ, it allows you space to ask those questions and approach the relationships with curiosity, and seeking better understanding of each other. Um, and so I think I would say that like it's really healthy to have multi-ethnic, um, faith-driven relationships.
Yeah. And I think where I totally 100% agree with you. Going to a multi-ethnic church has been really great, I think, for me. And then growing up in a pretty singular Indian church, I think there's some strengths to it too. Because I think there's a camp of people who like to throw that out where I don't think there should be an Indian church, or I don't think really all of our churches need to be multi-ethnic. Well, we might not be serving the types of people that thrive in some of those places, right? And who need that. And so I think the gospel is intended for all. I think it's a central theme of it, especially in the New Testament, right? And I'm wondering, how do we make those places thrive at the same time, right? Like, do you feel like if you're part of a multi-ethnic church that you got to serve that, but then do you ever feel a calling to the Indian population that still need this type of cross-cultural example?
Completely. And honestly, so I have experience with college ministry, and it's primarily like South Asian University, but I've gotten exposed to Crew recently. And I am seeing like this hunger and this thirst for the next generation to find South Asian Christian community that is outside of their church. And so that I think is in my framework how like to build that healthy community, because I do truly believe that like there is beauty in the ethnic churches and there is a need for the ethnic churches. And I think honestly, like I want to spread more of that, of the purpose of why God created them and why they've lasted for so long. Because many of us would not be here today without the ethnic churches.
Right.
But in the new young adult population, like spaces like InterVarsity and Design is Crew's organization that I think maybe both of you guys are part of, those spaces thrive because people are able to come despite their denomination, despite even maybe their ethnicity. They don't have to be Malayali, and they can come and just be united in the fact that they are Christian. And I think that is really important. Where it's not distinguished. Like, I don't think Christian community should be distinguished by what church you go to.
Yep.
I think you can just be distinguished by the fact that you're Christian.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was going to say that I really like that. I mean, even taking InterVarsity and Crew almost like as a microcosm of like that ecumenical fellowship, right? Like we are all Christians, so underneath that banner, we have our specific churches that we go to, but we're still united under this banner of Christ. And even thinking about multi-ethnicity in that sort of sense too, I think, I forgot, I was at a conference and that question kind of came up, right? Like, what is the need for a mono-ethnic church in such a multi-ethnic country like America? And one of the ways we think about potentially multi-ethnicity is you can either think of it as a church that's extremely diverse, or you can think of different churches in a geographical area. Maybe there's an Indian church and a Black church and a white church and a Hispanic church and a Romanian church and all these different ethnicities that are very effective at reaching their people because of some of the comfortability that we already have and those cultural barriers not necessarily being there, but all of those churches working together in a network as well, just being connected, interconnected with one another. So I thought that example was just so good for me to even marinate on, because I was probably on the camp of just thinking like, why do we need a mono-ethnic church here in America? What's the point? But that really helped to reshape my own perspective as well.
Yeah.
I think that's the perspective a lot of people have, especially like if they've been burned by the church, which is a lot of people's like story. Um, and so I think like creating like conversations that reframe people's perspectives and reframe like how God has used both and intends to use both, and the beauty in both and how we can use both to build a kingdom together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that too, because our church hurt. I think that's a trending term nowadays, where we throw the baby out with the bathwater and our denomination and just our experience. And then we throw out that concept of a monoethnic church because we got burned, right? And we don't see the beauty in like preaching the gospel to the Jews and the Gentiles and really what that actually meant. So like there's this theme of collaboration, which I really love in the brown table talks and the deck and just the concept and what you're talking about. So community, bringing people together, I think that's really at the heart of like what we like to do too. How do you bridge the gap? How do you collaborate with other folks, because you're in multiple states or multiple churches and different circles of friends and influences? How do you actually foster collaboration through your organization?
I think that's one thing I'm continually learning to do and figuring out new ways to do, like creatively, especially. And thankfully, I know so many people with such creative minds that are getting to speak into it. Um, but the two imageries that like the Lord gave me as this ministry was created was one, the table, and then also two, a bridge actually. And not many people like know that part of the story because I've been trying to explore it more and more. But I think both keep this beautiful picture of like a collaboration and unity of sitting down and bridging a divide. Um, Tables can be war rooms, and you can have a table at a law office, or you can also have a bridge bridging two countries together that may be completely opposing. Um, and I think both paint the same picture. Virtually, it does. There's a lot of different ways that we are doing it, and we can do it. I think like having the conversation on social media is one thing with the general population. Being active on social media, posting things that we truly believe in rather than what is the status quo has been something that I've been really convicted with lately. And then the other thing that we are doing in this roundtable is we are creating that community and that network and bridge of leaders. Because I think one thing that I have been really passionate about is that us as leaders need to be leading by example.
Mm.
Um, and so that's something that we're creating as a roundtable, uh, a organization or a group of leaders that are networked and bridging the gap and sharing resources and sharing motivation and truly like collaborating to build a kingdom, but then also to reach the diaspora. Um, the South Asian diaspora is a whole nother story. Jeswin, you know the stats on that one. Um, but I think that's become a big part of my heart for the roundtable as well, is reaching that diaspora.
Yeah, do you want to dive into that maybe a little bit deeper in terms of you touched on some of the future initiatives that you guys are working on, whether it's leadership network, connections, but even the diaspora component of it. I think sometimes when we talk about just our South Asian experiences, we're really thinking about the second generation church folks, but the Indian diaspora, like you said, is so much bigger than that. Could you maybe speak a little bit into how you're sort of envisioning the brown table evolving and really reaching maybe that demographic as well?
Yeah. A couple different ways. So one thing that was voiced pretty early on in the creation of Roundtable Talks, the card deck, was, wow, what would it look like to have a deck that we can use as an evangelistic tool to go out on campuses, to take to coffee shops and just talk to other brown people. And so that is something that we are actively working on and praying towards, of creating a deck that is specific to meet that need. Um, I think the other thing in reaching that diaspora that's really needed is for there to be unity that is seen amongst our churches, whether or not we are second generation or first generation. Uh, the South Asian community is very divisive. Like, we have division ingrained in us, whether it's through the caste system or if it's jobs or denominations or what language you speak, what culture you are, whether you're Punjabi or Bangladeshi or whatever. Um, and so to explain to the diaspora what unity in Christ looks like, we need to be showing that. And I think that's something that we aren't doing very well amongst South Asians in general. And I truly do believe that, like, if we have a better framework of that unity, um, it will be easier to display what God's kingdom looks like here on earth.
That's huge. And I think that's why it resonates, I think, with us, and why we would love to have a ton of people doing amazing things on the podcast or collaborate with. But if it's not central to the gospel, it's like, we don't need it. Because I think in my experience, that's the only thing that could transform the hearts of people, right? Like, if we want to foster community, the only thing that does that is the gospel. And I think you're portraying that with these decks, and it opens up people's hearts to that. And so you're bringing up collaboration and reaching people, especially the diaspora. One thing I've noticed, especially when we talk about Indian people and brown people, like, we listen to other brown people. Like, even though you might be in a multi-ethnic setting, and even in your job, it might be very multicultural too. Chances are there's a strength that we have as people, that we tend to listen and feel safe with people who look and talk like us, right? And I don't think we tap into that enough. Maybe, I don't know if it's a competitive nature. We don't like to collaborate. Why don't people collaborate more, right? And I think to get to that point where I don't think everybody would collaborate, but it's the people who are, I think you're tapping into this, in leaders. They're the ones who take that initial charge to collaborate. So, and maybe this is just more open kind of discussion too, but like, how do we foster better collaboration? Because in this 21st century of content creators galore, right? Everybody has a TikTok channel. Everybody has a podcast, right? It's, how do we foster collaboration and tap into the strengths that we have as brown people? I don't know. That's an open question.
So I'm curious who else was.
Yeah, no, I mean, things like this, I think there is, in my opinion, I think there is a mental shift in at least our generation, kind of, and we got to take this kind of thinking about it holistically. I think I'll give a lot of credit to the first generation, right? Like, you picked up your life and moved across the country. You left your family, your friends, your parents back in India to do something that was so like a trailblazer, right? Like, going into the unknown and coming here to America. But at the same time, a lot of times we've used the church almost like as that social network that we were missing, because we've come to a country, we don't really get the recognition that we might have had back at home. And we start turning a church from this missional organization that it was intended to be, to a social setting that we see a lot of brokenness in, right? Like, why do we think about positions and other politicking type of roles that we see in that first generational church? Maybe part of it is due to that recognition that we lack when we're working menial jobs here in America, because we've made that transition. I'm not saying that as a blanket statement, but that might be part of it. But in the generation down, you really think about our generation, I do think there is a heart to want to work and fix these things amongst a certain group of people. And there's also probably a heart that just wants to leave it altogether amongst another group of people. So I do think there are more opportunities now to collaborate, and it's an exciting time. I think it's a very exciting time to start gathering leaders together that have a vision for this, because of what's coming down the line. I think, Priya had referenced this too. We both met at this advanced initiative roundtable that happened here in Chicago. One of the stats that was thrown out there is, up to this point in America, I believe there are, was it 8 million Indian or South Asian citizens, and in the next I think 20 years, that number is expected to jump to like 20 million. Right. I forgot what the numbers were. Don't quote me on that. I'll double check. We'll put the right stats out there. But there's an exponential wave that is coming. And this is the ripe time to figure out how do we collaborate and tackle some of these issues, because we have to be ahead of the curve of the tidal wave of what's coming, because this might be the reason we are created here for this moment. So that's my thought. I think there is a mentality shift that would allow us to collaborate, but maybe it's time we really accelerate some of these things because of what's coming. But Priya, I'd love to hear your take on this.
So many takes on this. It gets me so excited to know what is coming, because I do truly believe that like there are intentional things happening right now for a reason. And it's so cool to the past like year, I've had some conversations with leaders across the country in the formation of Roundtable, but also like in just talking about what uh, the kingdom looks like and what is happening on the kingdom as a whole. And there truly is a belief that there is a whole revival coming, and that South Asians are going to be a huge part of it. And I truly, truly believe that. I am seeing in these conversations, there's been so many conversations where I'm meeting someone for the first time and we have the same idea and we have the same heart, and there's so many like congruencies lining up. And then I connect with someone else and it's the same thing. And so then I connect all three of us and it's the same thing. And so I've seen that to be like super rewarding and super cool. That's just fueled me on to be like, there is something happening that I've never experienced before, but God is putting the same yearnings and wants in people's hearts and ideas in people's hearts, um, that can be used to magnify the kingdom further and further. I also saw this like in a conference in January where the presence of the Lord was so like real. And it led to me having like some really, really intentional conversations with like believing that this next generation is going to be leading the charge. Um, and us as leaders that are a little bit older, gonna say that in a nice way, we need to be ready to steward them and disciple them, so they can lead effectively.
Yeah, I've been speaking as the only gray-haired person on this podcast. I completely agree because, when you mentioned a couple themes, Priya, I think this outlines a lot of conversations that spiderweb from here, from the bridge. I don't know, Justin, you probably remember our large group bridge way back in the day. Even like there's dreams and people that have had dreams even when this ministry started about literally a bridge. And there's so many things about even timings where people have put things on God's on people's hearts at the same time in the same year. It's all these crazy coincidences that we think are crazy, but it's really God intentionally weaving stories together because it's like one big mission, right? I love that because yes, we do need to disciple, because when you think about the command and the Great Commission, like what are we supposed to do is like go make disciples. And the one thing that comes to mind is like there's this huge impact, right? And especially in the days of content creation, there's like how to make everything go viral and millions of impressions and things like that. But really, at the end of the day, it's this one-on-one heart change that you could have with somebody, right? Like Jesus ministering to the 12 in a small group setting with people. Like you ask them a question and then their heart opens up and their life gets transformed, right? Like how do we get to that level? And I think this is a really great avenue to do that. Like, how do we spark heart change, and open avenues for the gospel to like make its way, right? So like as you think about like this grand mission and this grand desire that you've kind of outlined, Priya, how do you see the next step? Like what ideally 5 years, 10 years from now? That's a typical job interview question. Like where do you see yourself in 5 years? But like where would you love to see God work? And maybe he has a completely different plan in 10 years. Like, what's your heart to see the growth of your ministry?
I truly don't know. I think this ministry has been very like God led. to start a ministry in the middle of grad school was not anything I could have ever fathomed. And so I truly had to trust the Lord in it. I think in 5 years, I want to see us as South Asians um, leading the charge and advancing the gospel, um, and doing that in a healthy way that leads to like the longevity of people's faith. Um, because we can teach people about the gospel, we can tell people all about Jesus, but if we are not able to steward them and uplift them as they pursue their faith, what are we doing? Um, and so I think that truly is where community comes into effect. Um, Also to answer your question from previously, like as in terms of collaboration, what do we need to be doing, especially as leaders? We need to be letting go of our pride. One thing that I really reflected on was back when in the 70s, when all of our ancestors like came to these states, they came with no pride and they just wanted to survive. And that is what led to them building these connections. They would connect people to different jobs and they would connect people to different, they would matchmake and do all of that. And that's something that's like that use of those relationships and connection is something we don't do nowadays. And I really questioned why. And I think it is because of our pride, where we need to start connecting people more, connecting people to um, jobs as mentorship, discipleship, whether it be relationally. Um, but yeah, I think like what is preventing us from connecting is like our pride. And then also like whether or not we are operating from a place of hurt. Because unfortunately, hurt is a big part of many, many people's story. Um, and so that's something as leaders I have been very vocal about is like challenging other leaders to evaluate how heavily those two factors are weighing on them and how they are leading their ministries and how they are speaking to people in general.
Yeah, absolutely. That's totally valid. And just like you said, 5 years from now, hopefully there is a lot more healing so that people can be more catalyzed to be involved in what's coming, just like you said, Priya. And I like that you left it open ended. This has been God led, and who knows where God goes with this, but keeping an open hand, being humble and seeing where that goes. But that maybe kind of leads us to sort of where we're wrapping up here. Well, if we don't know where we're going for 5 years, but people want to keep up with your journey, how can they do that? What are some ways that people could get involved with the Brown Table? How could they connect to you? And really, how do they keep up with where God is leading this ministry for, the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Let's see where this goes.
Let's see where it goes. Well, I'd love to be friends. Let's be friends. You can connect with us at Come to the Brown Table on social media. We're on Instagram. Ways to get involved are interacting with us on social media, spreading the message and the things that we are advocating for, as well as buying a deck. There are Brown Table Talk stacks that are for sale. Um, and just bringing these conversations to your communities, I think is truly the biggest thing. Of course, praying for the ministry as a whole and the conversations that are being had. We have limited edition sweatshirts that I think we have like 6 left. And so it says, I created them, but I forgot what it says. It says Conduit for Love, Catalyst for Change. Um, and so we have limited edition sweatshirts if you want some merch. And then leaders, let's connect. I want to connect with different leaders. Let's have these conversations as leaders and come join the Leader Network.
That's awesome. I think fostering collaboration is something we can all do, support, share the content, and open up the conversation, right? Connecting community is something that's at the heart of our mission, and it just seems at the heart of yours. And I think at the heart of God, eventually, you're like to connect everybody, because it's not just about the Indian community or the South Asian community. It's about how do we reach the world with the gospel, and opening up our hearts with these types of questions to be more vulnerable gets us there. And I think that's what gets us really excited. We're so happy to be your friend, first and foremost, and then also just to collaborate with you. I think we need more of that because it's incredible how many leaders there are that are reaching out to the lost and impacting their community. What if we all got together and strived for the same purpose? Who knows what could happen? And I truly 100% believe that we'll see that in our lifetime, right? Priya, thank you so much for being on. And we are so excited. Check out Come to the Brown Table. Get that card deck. If we see you on site, we're asking you questions. Okay. So thank you, listeners. We'd love to kind of hear your feedback and your questions too. So please connect with us. But Priya, thank you so much for being on. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you sometime soon in the great city of Chicago.
Thanks, guys. Good talking to y'all.